Nakhichevan, the ancient land of Armenia. In lieu of a preface. In the Nakhichevan region, in Ailis, at that time lived people equal to gods. They drew water, planted gardens and cut stones. They were Armenians, who had visited and toured hundreds of foreign cities and villages, earning money bit by bit, only to turn every inch of their uglest land into a real little paradise. If a single candle were lit for every Armenian killed violently, the radiance of those candles would be brighter than the light of the moon. The Armenians endured everything, but they never agreed to change their faith. These people were tired and exhausted from violence, but they never stopped building their churches, writing their books and praying to their God, held up their hands to heaven. Akram Ailisli, Azerbaijani writer and playwright, hailed from Nakhichevan. In 2013, for these words written by him in his novel Stone Dreams, the writer was subjected to persecution and threats, and deprived of all titles and awards in his country. The history of the land of Nakhichevan. According to the interpretation of the Jewish historian Joseph Flavius, 1st century, the Armenian toponym Nakhichevan means the place of the first landing. He wrote that the city of Nakhichevan was built at the foot of the mountain to the top of which the Noah's Ark landed during the biblical flood. According to Max Fosmer, the toponym of Nakhichevan is derived from the Armenian proper name Nach and the word Avon, a place. German philologist Heinrich Hubschmann agrees with this interpretation. In the Toponymic Dictionary Geographical Names of the World, the author Yevgeny Pospelov points out that in the earliest written form of the toponym Nakhichevan, Nakhcha is the ancient Armenian and represents a tribal name, and the element Van a very productive in the ancient toponymy of Transcaucasia and Asia Minor, was used with the meaning of place, house, land. The Encyclopaedia Britannica traces the history of the region and the city from about 1500 BC. In the 2nd century AD, the city was known to Ptolemy under the name of Naxuana. At the beginning of the 2nd century BC, as part of the Bassorepida region, Vaspurakan, Nakhichevan was annexed to Greater Armenia by King Artashes I. From the beginning of the 2nd century BC to 428 AD, the territory of modern Nakhichevan was part of two neighboring provinces of Greater Armenia, Vaspurakan and Syunik. At the end of the 4th century, the scientist and the monk Mesrop Mashtots preached in the province of Vaspurakan. It was there that he came to the idea that it was necessary to translate the Bible into Armenian for the local population to understand. The monastery on the place where Mashtots preached was built in 456 and was being preserved until recently in the village named Mesropavan in honor of Mashtots. In 623, Nakhichevan continued to be one of the cities of Armenia, through which the Byzantine Emperor Irakli made his campaign to Persia. In the middle of 7th century, the entire Transcaucasia fell under the authority of the Arab Caliphate. In Arab sources of that time, Nakhichevan is mentioned as Nashava. In 705, Arabs burned alive in the churches of Nakhichevan and the neighboring village of Harm several hundred representatives of the Armenian nobility, who were invited by them allegedly to conclude a treaty. In 885, Nakhichevan was recaptured from the Arabs by the second king of Ani kingdom, Sambat I Bagratuni, who in 891–892 gave it on the rights of conditional possession to the Prince of Syunik. After that, Nakhichevan, or Nakhichevan, as it was also called, remained with Syunik. It was ruled by Orbilian and Prosian families, who, as it is seen from the Chronicle of Stepanos Orbilian, retained their significance even after the Turkic conquest. Guillaume de Rubrac reported of his meeting with Armenians in Nakhichevan in 1253–1255. Pontifical legate Rubrac, who visited the city soon after its defeat by the Mongols, found on a place of that once greatest and most beautiful city almost a desert. Before there were 800 Armenian churches in it, but now only 2 small ones, and the rest were destroyed by Saracens. In 14th century, Nakhichevan was ravaged by the invasion of Tamerlan. Approximately in the 1500, Turkic nomadic Kangarlu tribe, numbering 4,000–5,000 people, settled in Persian Armenia to the north of the Arax River. As of the beginning of the 16th century, the Nakhichevan region was inhabited by Christians and, to a lesser extent, Persians. The process of expelling the Armenians of the Nakhichevan was clearly marked in the late 16th, early 17th centuries, during the Ottoman-Persian Wars, when a large majority of the Armenian population of Nakhichevan region either died or was driven to Persia. At the same time, Transcaucasia was not only spontaneously but also purposefully populated by Kurds and Turkic nomadic tribes. In the autumn of 1603, Shah Abbas I occupied the Nakhichevan region during the war with the Ottoman Empire, but in the summer of 1604, the Ottoman troops launched a counter-offensive that took Shah Abbas by surprise. Not hoping to hold the seized lands, Shah Abbas decided to implement the scorched earth tactics and withdrew the entire population of Nakhichevan and Erivan, both Armenian and Muslim, deep into Persia. Erekel Dervishidze, a contemporary of the great Sargon, wrote, "He turned a prosperous and fertile Armenia into an uninhabited desert. In total, 250–300,000 Armenians were driven from Nakhichevan and Erivan to Persia. In particular, Julfa, a large city inhabited mainly by Armenians and a center of Armenian trade in the region, lost its population. About 20,000 residents of Julfa were relocated to Isfahan, where they formed the Armenian suburb that still exists today, New Julfa. Among those resettled was the Turkic Kangarlu tribe, who was allowed to return to Nakhichevan under Shah Abbas II, a descendant of Shah Abbas I. In the late of 18th, early 19th centuries, Nakhichevan was the capital of Persian semi-independent Nakhichevan Khanate. In 1813, under the Gulistan Peace Treaty, Russia recognized this Khanate in perfect power of Persia. But with the beginning of a new Russian-Persian war, the Khanate was occupied by the troops of General Paskevich, who on June 26, 1827, entered Nakhichevan, defeating 3,000 Persian cavalry detachment. Under the Peace Treaty of Turkmenchay, signed on February 10, 1828, the territory of the Erivan and Nakhichevan Khanates was ceded by the Shah in full ownership of the Russian Empire. At the same time, the city of Nakhichevan became part of the newly created Armenian province. Since 1849, it had been the center of Nakhichevan district of Erivan Governorate. The Soviet period of Nakhichevan. In June 1918, the city was first occupied by Turkish troops, with the support of which the Arax Republic was proclaimed. And then, in the November 1918, they were replaced by the British. In March 1919, the Kara-Barik troops occupied Nakhichevan as a disputed territory between Azerbaijan and Armenia. On July 28, 1920, Nakhichevan was occupied by units of the 11th Red Army, while the destabilizing influence of the Turkish army was retained. In January 1921, in a conversation with a representative of Armenia, Joseph Stalin stated that there could be no talk about Nakhichevan. It should definitely be part of Armenia. On November 30, 1920, the declaration of the Azerbaijani Revolutionary Committee was drawn up, and on December 1, 1920, Narimanov announced the declaration at a meeting of a Baku Council. Soviet Azerbaijan announces that from now on, no territorial issues can cause mutual bloodshed of 2 centuries-old neighboring peoples, Armenians and Muslims. Exactly this way the inhabitants of present Azerbaijan were called at that time. The territories of Zangezur and Nakhichevan districts are an inseparable part of Soviet Armenia, and the working peasantry of Nagorno-Karabakh are granted full right of self-determination. But at the beginning of 1921, a referendum was held among the Tatars, which showed that 90% of those participating in the referendum wanted to be part of the newly declared Azerbaijan as an autonomous republic. It was not enough that many Armenian villages did not participate in the voting, but they were not even aware of the transition of Nakhichevan under the Azerbaijani control. Due to the oppression of the new government in February 1921, many Armenian refugees gathered in Sadarak. And already on March 16, 1921, the governments of Soviet Russia and the Grand National Assembly of Turkey in Moscow concluded a treaty of friendship and brotherhood, according to which Nakhichevan region forms an autonomous territory under the Protectorate of Azerbaijan, provided that Azerbaijan will not cede this protectorate to a third state. According to the Encyclopedia Iranica, Nakhichevan was finally separated from Armenia by the Soviet-Turkish Treaty. According to Sergei Vostrikov, Nakhichevan was the core of the historical Armenian lands, which served as a bargaining chip in the territorial division and reapproachment between Soviet Russia and Kemalist Turkey. According to him, the formal reason for the transfer of Nakhichevan under the Protectorate of Azerbaijan was the fact that Armenian population was reduced by half as a result of the Armenian genocide and the massacres of Armenians in Baku, Nakhichevan and Shusha in 1918-1921. Thus, Turkish diplomats secured the isolation of Armenia and gained an access to Nakhichevan. In addition, Turkey had high hopes that the Zangezur region would also become part of Azerbaijan, which would give them an open route to Baku. However, after the uprising and major protests by the Armenians of Moscow, Zangezur became part of Soviet Armenia. Armenian architectural heritage and its destruction. The Armenians left a rich architectural heritage in Nakhichevan, which, however, was completely ignored by the Azerbaijani authorities and later declared Albanian or destroyed. According to Armenian researchers, the most ancient monuments of Nakhichevan region preserved until the 20th century are the Astvatsatsyn Monastery, the Holy Mother of God, the ancient center of the province of Gohtan, and there the monasteries of Saint Thomas and Saint Christopher, founded in the 4th century. In total, there were 12 monasteries and church in Agulis. The monastery of Surb-Nshan, the Holy Sign, founded in the 5th century. The monastery of Saint Tovmas in the village of Vanant, founded in 450. Surb-Gevorg Monastery in Ernjak, founded presumably in the 5th century, first mentioned in 841. Surb-Karapet Monastery, Saint John the Baptist, in Arbakunis, founded in 381. Surb-Astvatsatsyn Monastery, the Holy Mother of God, in Norashen, founded in 952. The fortress Tarman-Chats-Vang Church and the cemetery with Khachkars of the 16th-18th centuries in Norakert village. As noted by Viktor Schnirelman, an interesting monument is also the monastery of Saint Stephanos of the 7th century, known as the Red Monastery, Karmir Vang, now called Kizil Vang, near Nakhichevan in the city of Astapat, Armenian name. The annihilation of the Armenian cemetery in Julfa. According to International Council for the Conservation of Monuments and Sites, 800 Khachkars were destroyed by the Azerbaijani government in 1998. But the destruction was suspended due to UNESCO intersection. In 2002, the annihilation of the cemetery resumed, and by 2006 there was no trace of the cemetery. The Khachkars were destroyed and the site of the cemetery was purged. In spring of 2006, an Azerbaijani journalist from the Institute of War and Peace, Idrak Abbasov, tried to investigate the cemetery, but the local authorities banned to visit the site. Nevertheless, he managed to get a good look at the cemetery and confirmed that it has completely disappeared. On 30 May 2006, Azerbaijan banned a commission of the European Parliament from examining the former cemetery. In 2010, the eyewitness reports of the destruction of the cemetery had been confirmed by the American Association for the Advancement of Science based on the analysis of satellite images of the region. Data published in the art magazine Hyperallergic in 2019 showed that Armenian Khachkars has been secretly and systematically destroyed as part of Azerbaijan's alleged campaign to destroy traces of local Armenian culture in Nakhichevan. Agolis. In ancient times, the territory of Agolis was a part of Gokhtan Gavar, which at different times belonged to Syunik region of Great Armenia or to the Vaspurakan region. In the medieval period, Agolis was a center of writing and trade with major relationship with Russian and Western European merchants. Under the name Agolis, the city has been mentioned since the 11th century. In the 1010, Catholicos Sarkis called the city as Argulik. The same name was used in the 13th century by Stepanos Orbilian. In the 17th century, Zakaria Aguletsi called it Dasht. After the destruction of Juha, Agolis became a large city, whose population had reached 10,000 people by the end of the 17th century. Here, at the school of the monastery of Saint Apostle Thomas, the founder of the famous family of artists Hovnatanian, a prominent Armenian artist and ashuk Nagash Hovnatan, received his education. In the middle of the 18th century, the city of Agolis was ravaged and looted by Azad Khan. As a result, a large number of Armenians died from starvation, and many Armenians were forced to leave the city. By the end of the 19th century, there were 11 churches there, monasteries of Saint Tovmas, Saint Christopher, Saint Hovannes, Saint Jacob Hieropetats, Saint Stephanos, and others. The temple of Aguletsotz in Shusha was also built by the citizens. It was destroyed in 1919. Zoki Armenians and the population of Agolis. The indigenous population of Agolis is the Zoki Armenians, who speak a special Zok dialect. According to Nikolai Marr, the separation of the Zoks was influenced by the Scythians, who came from the north and mixed with the indigenous population in the 8th-7th centuries BC. In 1711, the German Orientalist Johann Joachim Schröder, in his book The Treasury of the Armenian Language, reports about the Agolis dialect of the Armenian language. According to the population census of 1897, 649 people lived in Lower Agolis, all Armenians. In Upper Agolis, 1,325 Armenians and 639 Azerbaijanis, mentioned in source as Tatars. If a single candle were lit for every Armenian killed violently, the radiance of those candles would be brighter than the light of the moon. The Armenians endured everything, but they never agreed to change their faith. These people was being exhausted and suffering from the violence, but they never stopped building their churches, writing their books, and praying to their God, held up their hands to heaven.